Let's get more on this now and speak to David Darosh. He's professor at the National Defense University and former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. So opposition fighters, David, saying they've entered the capital, Damascus. Some reports suggest even Assad himself may have fled. The situation, though, still not clear. But whatever the case, this rebel offensive has been extremely rapid. How has it happened all so quickly, David?
Well, because of the lack of morale and leadership in the Syrian Arab forces. So going all the way back to 2011, 2014, the intervention of Iranian and Russian forces, you started to get reports about how the Syrian Arab regime forces were basically not well led, more interested in extorting bribes from the civilian population than in actually fighting. And the actual fighting was being done primarily by Iranian-led proxies supported with air power from Russia. When Russian air power is removed, as it has been, and the Iranian-led proxies are unable to engage in battle, what you have left is demoralized, poorly led, poorly equipped, thoroughly corrupt institution, and people just aren't willing to take chances under those circumstances.
And David, what about the Syrian president himself? I mean, no indications yet that the palace or key institutions of power have been taken. But of course, if Damascus falls, it's all over for Assad, isn't it, really?
Well, not really. I mean, it's certainly not good. But, he's a member of the Alawite sect that has controlled Syria, his father. Obviously, and their heartland is actually to the areas west of the Aleppo-Hama Homs highway between the Lebanese and the Turkish border. France actually wanted to make that an independent country in 1924. So it's possible that he could retreat there and basically amongst a relatively friendly population. That's also the location of the Russian naval base and the Russian main air base in Syria. So there is the possibility he could scoot there, retrench. That would give the Russians and the Iranians some opportunity to recoup some of the funds that they've spent on him. And he could probably hold out there. It's difficult terrain and it's a friendly population.
David, in terms of the military,
Damascus.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the military dynamic on the ground, I mean, this looks like, as you were saying, a complete rout of the Syrian army. They don't seem to have put up any kind of effective fight against the armed opposition forces. How surprising is that, and why?
It's pretty surprising. The main reason is the Syrian army has always performed poorly in battle, except arguably the exception of the 1973, the initial phase of the 1973 war. The explanation has always been that the best unit of the Syrian army, the 4th Mechanized Division, that is kept in Damascus to protect the regime so there won't be a coup like there was in '67 when Bashir's father overthrew the government in the course of the 6 Days War. I would have expected that the 4th Division would have been deployed in the defense of Damascus. Right now, there's no indication of that. The 4th Division is commanded by Bashir's brother, but it's also the lead producer of Captagon within the Syrian state. And Captagon, the Captagon produced by Syria is more than the GDP of Syria. So you would expect them to put up some sort of fight, if only to protect their economic interests. But it looks as though the corruption and perhaps hard feelings over how the proceeds from the Captagon sales are distributed have led to failure of morale. And it is surprising to see resistance folding up so quickly.
David, what about Syria's key allies, Russia and Iran? I mean, there are reports, some reports, unconfirmed, that Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, were seen pulling out their forces along the Lebanese border. And Russia, of course, seems to be looking for a diplomatic off-ramp here. I mean, have they effectively abandoned Assad?
I think they have. I mean, Lebanese Hezbollah is unable to operate effectively. They're fighting for their life. They're being destroyed in Lebanon. And when they are, any significant concentrations they have in Syria are attacked by Israel, which has basically operated at will in Syrian airspace even before the collapse of Lebanese Hezbollah. Iran reportedly has ordered its senior Revolutionary Guard officials, who generally command the various militias of Iraqis, Afghans, Pakistanis, and who provide the key weapons and logistics and sometimes intelligence and guidance to Lebanese Hezbollah. They pulled those guys out. They don't want to have lose any more lives in Syria. And Russia has moved all their ships out of their naval base in Tartus, which, that's a 50-year-old base. It pre-exists Bashar al-Assad's regime, and it is their only active naval base in the Mediterranean, but they basically view it as unsafe, so they've abandoned that. So it looks as though the two main patrons of Assad have concluded it's too risky to stay, and even though they're owed a lot of money, upwards of $10 billion each, they may be writing that off because they just can't stay there and keep him in power any longer.
David, you're there in Washington, D.C., so let's talk about the U.S. position here. I mean, as we near the transition of power in Washington in January next year, Donald Trump has already said the U.S. should not be involved in the Syrian conflict.
Yeah, that's not just Trump's position. So recall back in the Obama administration when Assad was using chemical weapons against civilian populations. And Obama said that was a red line. Don't do that or else we'll get involved militarily. He was unable to carry his own party. The Democratic Party basically told him, no, we did not elect you to start Middle East wars. We elected you to end them. And so the United States stepped back, and many Syrians will say that that was a profound betrayal. So what you have is a broad consensus. The United States has no will to get involved in here. We have no real interest in the part of Syria, or no capabilities in the part of Syria where the fighting is ongoing. We do have a small presence in the east of the country, but that is hundreds of kilometers away from where the fighting is going on, and really is part of our effort against Daesh, which started in Syria and then spread into Iraq. So it's kind of hard. The United States is a very big and powerful country, but we really don't have a lot of ability to affect these things in Syria. We're pretty much spectators, and we're probably pretty far down the list of countries who have the ability to shape events right now. And
let's just stay with the opposition, because it's always easy in any kind of asymmetric warfare conflict for opposition forces to fight and liberate areas, David. But the opposition, they, of course, many different disparate groups, they'll need to unite to rebuild Syria once the fighting stops. And that's going to be a huge challenge, isn't it?
Well, even before you get to rebuilding Syria, you have the challenge of governing Syria. So the Assad regime, the Russians, the Iranians for years have tried to depict all of the opposition to Assad as basically Daesh or Al-Qaeda, so Sunni Salafist terrorists. And you'll recall back at the start of the war, Putin proposed the counterterrorism alliance with the United States and tried to revive all the imagery from World War II. And that was basically directed against Daesh. But what we saw was most of the Syrian and Russian effort was not against Daesh. It was against groups like, Islamist groups in the opposition to Bashar al-Assad in Idlib province, like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The issue we have now is that this group is very aware of that, and they are going to great lengths to try to present themselves as being multi-ethnic, respectful of other religions. They've appointed the Archbishop of Aleppo as the interim civil governor. They're trying to counter that narrative. They're engaging to actively show that that's not the case. But part of Assad's strength has been that a lot of religious groups in Syria, the Alawis, the Christians, and the Shia, believe that this is a Sunni Salafist group that will, operate like Daesh. And so, as they move into areas that are not majority Sunni, it is quite possible that HTS will have problems in maintaining the speed of operations and conquering land.
David, let me get a final thought from you in terms of the broader geopolitics regionally. I mean, so if Damascus has fallen and it's the end of the Assad regime, let's say, how does this change the balance of power regionally? And how much of a major blow is this to Iran, of course, and its influence across the region?
Yeah, it's a huge blow to Iran. So let's start with the tactical and work our way up. So tactically, control of Syria is critical for Iran supplying weapons, maintaining the level of supplies to Lebanese Hezbollah, which is the primary check on Israel that Iran enjoyed. I mean, they were not at all shy about saying, look, if you attack, say, our nuclear program, you're going to get, tens of thousands of rockets and missiles fired on you from Lebanese Hezbollah. Well, Israel has, for the most part, removed at least the near-range threat of attack from Lebanon. They've pretty much destroyed most of Lebanese Hezbollah's attack capabilities, at least south of the Litani River. They've also destroyed their missile depots in Syria and in Lebanon. And Iran will lose the ability to resupply those by the ground. So that's one problem. Then when you move up a little bit strategically, what you're seeing here is that in the last year, since the Hamas attack into Israel, Hamas is now basically an insurgent group confined within the borders of Gaza. It is unable to project power into Israel effectively. Lebanese Hezbollah is fighting for its life. It is not able to project sustained military power into Israel. And now we're seeing Bashar al-Assad going. So this concept of the axis of resistance that Iran supports has really lost all credibility. And what you're seeing is that the Arab armies who have served Iran's interests, they have suffered greatly and have almost been wiped out. But Iran has not suffered at all. So that puts the lie to this idea of a sort of pan-Islamic axis of resistance opposing the Zionist entity. What it really is seen as is Arabs taking risk for Iranian political influence. So it's going to be hard to reestablish that.
Yeah, all right. David Darosh, professor at the National Defense University. David, always good to get your thoughts in these moments. We will obviously come back to you later on in the programme if we can. Let's move on, because if you're just joining us, let's remind you of our break.